Sometimes it seems to me that the walls of the parish have absorbed more pain than joy. Behind them lie a wide variety of stories, each one unique. Recently, a woman came here. Her hands were shaking and her eyes were full of tears. I invited her to sit down and gave her time to collect her thoughts. Her story turned out to be long, full of trials and unexpected twists. But the main thing in it was the feeling of loneliness that she had carried within herself for years. Today, I want to share her words with you. Here is her story. My name is Marlene Wakefield. I am 50 years old, and for the past 22 years, I have been teaching English at the high school in our small town of Harville, North Dakota. I have been married to Dexter for 26 years, and we have a daughter, Celeste, who is 24 and works as a nurse at the local hospital. Until recently, I considered our life to be quite ordinary and predictable. Dexter works as a purchasing manager at Gordon Stanfield's agricultural company. I teach children to read and write. We live in a house we bought 15 years ago on Elm Street, and there have been no major upheavals in our family. Harville is the kind of town where everyone knows each other, where the main events take place at church on Sundays and at school during football games, where the winters are long and harsh and the summers are short but beautiful. But in recent weeks, something has changed, and this change has been bothering me more and more every day. At first, I attributed Dexter's strange behavior to fatigue or problems at work, but gradually I realized that it was something more serious. On that Tuesday in October, when classes ended, I met Odette Crawford as usual at Rosie's, a small cafe on Main Street. It was one of the few places in town where you could sit and talk without worrying that your neighbors would hear every word. Odette has been working as a librarian at our city library for 18 years, and we have been friends for over 10 years. She is 2 years younger than me, has never been married, lives alone in a small but cozy apartment above Mrs. Porter's antique shop, and has an amazing ability to listen to people without judging them. Odette had lush red hair, which she always styled neatly, and a soft voice that calmed even the most restless library visitors. Rosie's Cafe was a typical small-town establishment: red vinyl seats, checkered tablecloths, the smell of coffee and fresh pastries, an old jukebox in the corner playing songs from the 70s and 80s. Rosie McDermott, the cafe's owner, was a woman in her 60s who knew the preferences of every regular customer and never forgot to ask about the health of their relatives. "The usual?" Rosie asked as she approached our table by the window. "Yes, please," I replied. "Coffee with milk and a slice of apple pie." "I'll have a cappuccino and a chocolate cookie," Odette added. When Rosie walked away, Odette looked at me intently. "You look tired," she said, adjusting her glasses. "And kind of tense." Did something happen? I hesitated for a long time, wondering whether to tell her about my suspicions. After all, maybe I was just imagining problems where there weren't any. But the anxiety was gnawing at me, and I needed to share it with someone. Besides, Odette was the only person in town I could completely trust. "Dexter's been acting strange," I finally said, looking down at my hands. "For the past 3 weeks, he's been different. Not like himself at all." "Different in what way?" Odette asked, leaning across the table toward me. Rosie brought our order, and I waited until she walked away before continuing. "He's become secretive. He used to tell me all about work, complain about Stanfield and his demands, share his plans for the weekend. Now he answers my questions in monosyllables or pretends not to hear me. When the phone rings, he goes into another room to talk or hangs up and says it was a wrong number. And he comes home later and later." Odette nodded, listening intently and slowly stirring sugar into her cappuccino. "Yesterday, he didn't come home until 10 o'clock," I continued, feeling the tension in my chest increase as I finally spoke about it out loud. He said he was delayed because of inventory at the warehouse. But when I asked how long the inventory would take, he got angry and said I was asking too many questions. Can you imagine? In 26 years of marriage, he's never said things like that to me. That's really not like Dexter, Odette agreed. He's always been so open, especially with you. I remember him talking about his work at the library's summer picnic last year. He joked that he knew more about agriculture than some farmers. Yes, exactly, I sighed. But there's something else. He's become nervous. Very nervous. He flinches when I approach him from behind, even if I stomp my feet on purpose so he can hear me. He sleeps poorly, tossing and turning all night, sometimes getting up and walking around the house. And the day before yesterday, I accidentally saw him checking the locks on the front door 3 times before going to bed. Then he checked the locks on the first floor windows. Odette frowned, putting down her spoon. That's really strange. Very strange. Have you thought about— She paused, searching for the right words. Have you thought that he might have another woman? The thought had crossed my mind, of course, although I tried to dismiss it. Dexter had never been handsome, short, about 5'7", with a receding hairline that had appeared when he was 35, and prone to weight gain, especially in recent years. But lately, he'd been taking better care of himself than usual, buying 3 new shirts, which according to him, he needed for meetings with clients, and starting to use cologne, which he used to only wear on holidays. I don't know, I replied honestly, taking a bite of the pie, which suddenly seemed tasteless to me. Maybe, although I think it's something else. He doesn't look happy, like men usually look when they're having an affair. At least, that's how I imagine it. He looks scared. Yes, scared. As if he's expecting something bad to happen. Are you okay financially? Odette asked cautiously. Maybe he has financial problems he doesn't want to tell you about? I thought about it. Dexter always handled our finances, but I knew the big picture. His salary plus mine allowed us to live quite comfortably by Harville standards. We had a mortgage. Dexter's car wasn't new, but was in good condition, and my car had also served us faithfully for 8 years. We didn't spend much on entertainment, didn't travel often, and mostly shopped at local stores. I don't think so, I said. Although the last time we discussed money was 2 months ago, when we were planning to replace the roof in the spring. Everything was fine then. But now that you mention it, I remember that last weekend he sat for a long time with a calculator and some papers. When I asked what he was calculating, he quickly put everything away and said he was just checking the accounts. We sat in the cafe for another half hour, going over possible reasons for Dexter's strange behavior. Odette suggested that he might have health problems that he was hiding so as not to worry me, or that something serious was happening at work. Maybe Stanfield was planning layoffs or selling the company. She advised me to talk to my husband directly, but I was afraid of such a conversation. What if my suspicions were confirmed? What if it turned out to be something even worse than I thought? I think you need to find out the truth, Odette said as we were leaving. Uncertainty is worse than any bad news. At least if you know the truth, you can do something about it. I walked home slowly, enjoying the cool autumn air and trying to organize my thoughts. The temperature was around 10 degrees, and a light wind was blowing, stripping the last leaves from the trees. Our house stood at the end of a quiet street called Elm Street, surrounded by old maple and oak trees that were now ablaze with yellow and red. The house was built in the 1950s, a single story with a small porch, and a neat lawn that Dexter always kept in perfect order. Now the lawn was covered with fallen leaves, which would normally have been cleared away by this time. But for some reason, Dexter hadn't tended the garden for 2 weeks. As I approached the gate, Barnaby Hester, our neighbor on the right, called out to me. His house was similar to ours, only slightly smaller, with blue shutters and rose bushes under the windows, which his late wife Dorothy had planted many years ago. Barnaby was 67 years old and had retired 5 years ago after working his entire life as a railroad mechanic. His wife had died 3 years ago of pancreatic cancer, and since then, he had lived alone, spending most of his time in his garden or reading the newspaper on his porch. Barnaby was a tall, thin man with gray hair and kind brown eyes, always ready to help his neighbors. "Marlena!" he called, limping toward me across his yard. I noticed that he was moving with difficulty, holding his lower back with one hand. "Could you help me?" "Of course, Barnaby." "What's wrong?" I stopped at our shared fence, concerned about his well-being. "Well, this damn sciatica is killing me!" He grimaced in pain and rubbed his lower back. "Yesterday, I bent down to pick up a newspaper that had fallen from the porch, and now my back is so bad that I can't sit or stand properly. I was up all night with the pain. Do you happen to know of any good ointment for back pain?" Going to the pharmacy is a real ordeal, and it's 2 days until Monday. I thought about it. I should have some diclofenac ointment at home, which was prescribed to me last year when I strained my neck after turning awkwardly toward the blackboard in class. There was also some kind of warming ointment that Celeste brought after I complained of shoulder pain. "I think I have something suitable," I said. "I just need to look in the storage room upstairs, where I keep my medicines and medical supplies. I'll find it tomorrow morning and bring it to you." "Thank you so much, Marlene." Barnaby sighed with relief. "You always come through. I didn't know what to do. I tried taking the usual painkillers, but they don't help, and a hot bath only made it worse." "It's okay." I smiled at him. "For now, try applying something cold to the sore spot for about 15 minutes, then take a break and repeat. Sometimes that helps with acute pain." Barnaby was a good neighbor, quiet, polite, always ready to help. In winter, he cleared snow not only from his driveway, but also from ours. And in summer, he sometimes brought us vegetables from his small but neat garden: tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini. After his wife's death, he became even more attentive to those around him, as if trying to fill the void in his life by caring for others. I entered the house and immediately sensed that Dexter was not yet home. The house was filled with that special silence that only occurs when you are alone, a silence in which you can hear the ticking of the clock in the living room, the humming of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the creaking of the floorboards under your feet. I hung my coat in the hallway, took off my shoes, and went into the kitchen. There I was met with a slight mess left over from the morning: Dexter's unwashed coffee cup, crumbs from toast on the table, an open jar of jam. I made myself some tea with honey and sat down in the living room with a pile of notebooks. I had to check the 7th-grade essays on the topic, my favorite literary hero. I usually enjoyed reading my students' work, but today I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts kept returning to my conversation with Odette and Dexter's strange behavior. I reread the same sentence several times without understanding its meaning. At 5:30, I heard the sound of a car in the driveway, but it wasn't Dexter's car. It was Mrs. Anderson's car from across the street, picking up her granddaughter after her visit. I caught myself hoping every time I heard the engine that it was my husband coming home, and at the same time fearing that moment. Dexter arrived at 6:30, which was quite early for him lately. I heard the front door slam, and he hung his coat in the hall. I recognized the sound of the coat rack, which always creaked under the weight of his thick winter coat. Then I heard him climb the stairs to the bedroom with difficulty. His steps were slow and tired. A few minutes later, he came downstairs wearing jeans and an old plaid shirt that he had been wearing at home for about 5 years. He looked tired and irritated. His face was gray, and he had dark circles under his eyes. How's work? I asked, trying to make my voice sound as natural as possible and putting the notebooks on the coffee table. Fine, he replied curtly, not looking at me and heading straight for the kitchen. What's for dinner? I made chicken with vegetables, I said, following him. It's in the oven, almost done. I also made rice and a tomato salad. He nodded and walked over to the refrigerator. He took out a can of beer, opened it with a metal tab that made a characteristic hissing sound, and took a big gulp. I noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. Dexter, I began cautiously, watching his face. Maybe we should talk? He tensed up. His whole body seemed to freeze, but he didn't turn to me. About what? His voice sounded wary. Nothing in particular. It's just, I feel like we haven't been communicating as much lately. You used to always tell me about your day. We discuss plans for the weekend, talk about Celeste. And now, I have a lot of work to do, he interrupted, still standing with his back to me and looking out the window above the sink. Stanfield wants the annual purchasing report finished by the end of the month. Plus, I have to prepare the plan for next year. It's very difficult. You don't understand. I wanted to say that I understood, that I was ready to listen and help. But at that moment, the phone rang. Dexter turned abruptly, his face contorted with some incomprehensible emotion, fear, anger, and he quickly picked up the receiver. Hello? His voice was tense. Pause. Yes, it's me. Another pause, during which he glanced nervously at me. Not now. I'm at home. Call back later. He hung up abruptly, and I saw him swallow. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, even though it wasn't hot in the house. Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. A colleague. Work-related, he turned away again and took another sip of beer. Why can't you talk about work at home? I took a step toward him. You always used to. Dexter finally turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes that frightened me. Anger? Despair? Something dark and unfamiliar. Marlene, stop it, he said sharply, almost hissing. Not everything in this world is about you. Not everything needs to be discussed and analyzed. Sometimes people just want to be in silence. I stepped back as if he had hit me. In 26 years of marriage, Dexter had never spoken to me in that tone. Even when we argued, and we did argue like any family, he was never so cold and harsh. At that moment, Celeste appeared in the doorway. Our daughter was tall and slender, having inherited my figure, but with her father's dark hair and gray eyes. She was wearing her blue nurse's uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She worked the evening shift at the hospital and often stopped by for dinner before work. Hi, she said, kissing me on the cheek. Her lips were cool from the autumn air. You both look so gloomy. Has something happened? Everything's fine, dear, I replied hastily, trying to smile. Just tired after a long day at work. Dexter muttered something unintelligible in response to his daughter's greeting and went back to his beer. How are things at the hospital? I asked, taking the chicken out of the oven and trying to steer the conversation back to normal. Not bad. It was pretty quiet today. Celeste sat down at the table and looked at her father with concern. Dad, are you okay? You look kind of tired. I'm fine, Dexter snapped. Not everyone can look like a 24-year-old girl. Celeste blinked in surprise. Dexter was usually proud of his daughter and never spoke to her in that tone. Dinner was tense. Celeste talked about her patients, an elderly man recovering from heart surgery, a woman who had given birth to twins, a teenager who had broken his arm during soccer practice. I kept the conversation going, asked questions, and tried to create an appearance of normality, while Dexter ate silently, occasionally making short, not very friendly comments. When Celeste mentioned that she was planning to take a vacation in November to visit her friend Jessica in Minnesota, he snorted. Of course, all anyone thinks about is having fun and spending money. Celeste looked at her father in surprise, a flash of hurt in her eyes. Dad, I've been saving up for this trip for 6 months, and it's only for 3 days. Everyone saves up, Dexter said, without looking up from his plate. And then they wonder why they don't have enough money for the really important things. I didn't understand what he was getting at. We didn't have any serious financial problems. At least I didn't think so. Of course, we didn't live in luxury, but my teaching salary plus Dexter's income allowed us to live comfortably by Harville standards. What important things? Celeste asked, putting down her fork. Never mind, Dexter muttered. Just forget about this trip. Dexter, I interjected. Celeste is a grown woman. She has the right to decide how to spend her money. He looked at me as if I had said something treasonous. Of course she does, he said. Everyone has the right. And then they come and ask for help. When did I ask you for help? Celeste protested. I pay for my apartment, my car, everything else. I've never asked you for money since I started working. Not yet, Dexter said grimly. After dinner, Celeste helped me clear the table, and Dexter went into his study and turned on the TV at full volume. He was watching some fishing show, even though he had never been interested in fishing. When my daughter was about to leave, she paused in the hallway, putting on her jacket. Mom, she said quietly, looking toward the study, where the loud voices of the TV hosts could be heard. Is everything okay with you and Dad? I hesitated, not knowing how to respond. On the one hand, I didn't want to bother my daughter with my suspicions and family problems. On the other hand, Celeste was a grown woman. She had been living separately for 3 years, and she had a right to know if something serious was going on in the family. Your father has been very nervous lately, I said cautiously. Maybe he's having problems at work. Or health problems he doesn't want to talk about. Celeste frowned as she zipped up her jacket. He really is acting strange today. Usually, he asks me about work, takes an interest in my plans, jokes about my colleagues. But today it's like he doesn't see me. And that comment about money, that's not like him at all. Maybe he just needs time to sort out his problems, I said, although I didn't really believe it myself. Celeste hugged me. She was a few inches taller than me and always hugged me so tightly that I felt protected. If anything happens, if you need help, will you tell me? She whispered in my ear. Of course, dear. Of course. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Dexter had already left for work. I heard the front door slam around 7 in the morning, but I pretended to be asleep. I didn't want to face his coldness and irritation again first thing in the morning. At breakfast, I kept thinking about yesterday's conversation with Odette and my husband's strange behavior. Maybe I was really missing something. Maybe there were signs that I wasn't noticing or was misinterpreting. Around 9 in the morning, I remembered my promise to Barnaby to find some ointment for his back pain. The poor man must have been in agony all night. I went upstairs to the storage room, where old things, seasonal clothing, and the home medicine cabinet were kept. The storage room was a small room under the roof, with a sloping ceiling and one small window. It always smelled of dust and old things. Along the walls were cardboard boxes labeled winter clothes, school supplies, photos, Celeste, children's things. In the far corner was an old cabinet where I kept medicines, bandages, thermometers, and other medical supplies. I opened the cabinet doors and began to sort through the contents. There were bandages of various sizes, iodine, green paint, headache pills, and cough syrup that had expired and needed to be thrown away. The diclofenic ointment should have been on the top shelf. Standing on tiptoe, I reached for the top shelf, but accidentally knocked a cardboard box standing next to the cabinet with my elbow. The box fell, and some papers and old photographs spilled out of it. Cursing myself for my clumsiness, I crouched down to pick up the scattered items. That's when I noticed that there was something else behind the fallen box, a dark blue sports bag that I had never seen there before. The bag was quite large, with white stripes on the sides, clearly new. I was sure that there had been nothing in that corner of the storage room before. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the bag toward me. It was surprisingly heavy, and tried to unzip it. The zipper was stuck, as if the bag was tightly packed. When I finally managed to open it, I saw something that made me gasp in amazement. The bag was full of money. Not just money, stacks of $100 bills, neatly tied with rubber bands. I had never seen so much cash in my life. My hands trembled as I took out one stack and counted the bills. 100, $10,000 in one stack. With my heart pounding, I began to count the stacks. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30. Exactly 30 stacks of $100 bills. $300,000. I sat down right on the floor of the storage room, unable to believe my eyes. $300,000. That was equal to our combined income for 4 years. Where could Dexter have gotten that kind of money? And why was he hiding it in the storage room without saying a word to me? My first thought was that he had stolen it. But where? From whom? Dexter worked as a purchasing manager. He didn't have access to large sums of cash. Or did he? My second thought was that he had found it somewhere. But where could you find $300,000? And shouldn't you report such a find to the police? My third thought was that he had won it. But Dexter never gambled. He only bought lottery tickets on major holidays. I sat on the floor of the storage room, holding the wad of cash in my hands, and felt my world crumbling. All the strange things about my husband's behavior in recent weeks suddenly made sense. The nervousness, the secrecy, the late nights, the phone calls that sent him running to another room. Whatever this money meant, Dexter was clearly doing something illegal, and he was hiding it from me. I carefully put the stacks back in the bag, zipped it up, and put the bag back where I found it. My hands were shaking and my throat was dry. I needed time to think about what to do next. I never found the ointment for Barnaby. After discovering the money, I couldn't think about anything else. I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and sat in the kitchen, trying to collect my thoughts. I had to wait for Dexter and demand an explanation. But how to start such a conversation? Honey, I accidentally found $300,000 in the storage room. Could you explain where it came from? It sounded absurd. On the other hand, I have the right to know what is going on in my own home. If Dexter is involved in something criminal, it concerns me too. I was on pins and needles all day. At school, I mechanically taught my classes, but my thoughts kept returning to the bag hidden in the storage room. The students seemed to notice my distraction. In the last class, one of the boys even asked if I was okay. I got home at 4 o'clock and went straight up to the storage room to make sure I hadn't imagined it. The bag was in the same place. The money was real. Dexter came home at 6:30. I heard the sound of his car and felt my heart beat faster. He entered the house as usual, hung up his jacket, and went upstairs to change. When he came down to the kitchen, I was already waiting for him, sitting at the table. "Hi," he said, avoiding my gaze. "What's for dinner?" "Dexter, we need to talk." Something in my tone made him sit up. He slowly turned to face me. "About what?" "About the money in the storage room." I saw the blood drain from his face. He stood there with his mouth open for a few seconds, then sank heavily into the chair across from me. "You found it!" I said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. $300,000, Dexter. $300,000 in cash, in a gym bag in our storage room. Please explain to me where it came from. He was silent, staring at his hands folded on the table. I could see the muscles in his jaw tense. Dexter, I'm waiting for an answer. I can't, he said quietly. You can't what? You can't explain to your wife where $300,000 came from in the house? You wouldn't understand. Try. I'm a grown woman, Dexter. Whatever it is, I have a right to know. He looked up at me, and I saw fear and despair in his eyes. I took it from work, he finally said. Took it? What do you mean, took it? Stole it, he said, as if the word burned his tongue. I stole it from the company. The world around me seemed to stop. I knew he was going to say something like that, but hearing it out loud was still a shock. How? Was all I could manage to say. Dexter stood up and began pacing around the kitchen, not looking at me. We have a major contract to supply fertilizer to farms in 3 counties. The contract is worth $1.5 million. I'm responsible for paperwork, negotiating prices with suppliers, all the financial details. He stopped at the window, looking out into the yard. 3 months ago, I found a supplier who could provide the same fertilizer at a lower price. But instead of saving the company that money, I forged documents. I made up fake invoices showing the old price, and I pocketed the difference. I sat there, unable to say a word. My husband, with whom I had lived for 26 years, turned out to be a thief. Why? I finally asked. Why did you need the money? Dexter turned to me. A feverish determination appeared in his eyes. I wanted to start my own business. Buy a small agricultural supply store in Fargo. There's a good location available, and the owner is willing to sell for $400,000. I thought I could earn that money honestly and return it to the company before anyone noticed. But you knew it was theft? That it was a crime? I knew, he said, sitting down at the table again. But I was so tired of working for Stanfield. I've been making him money for 20 years, and I get pennies. He drives new cars, lives in a huge house, vacations in Europe. And we still live in this old house, scrimping on every purchase. We live fine, Dexter. We have everything we need, the essentials. He slammed his fist on the table. What if you get sick? What if I get fired? What will we leave Celeste? This house and a few $1,000s in the bank. I had never heard him say things like that before. Dexter always seemed to me to be a man who was content with his life, not striving for wealth. Dexter, this is crazy. Do you understand what you've gotten us into? I didn't want to get you into this. He stood up and began pacing the kitchen again. I wanted to decide everything myself, without bothering anyone. It was supposed to be my problem. Your problem? We're married, Dexter. Your problems are my problems. And if you go to prison, who do you think will suffer? Just you? He stopped and looked at me with despair. I didn't want it to turn out this way. I just wanted a better life for us. For you and Celeste. Don't use us as an excuse, I said, standing up and walking over to him. You wanted a better life for yourself. And you were willing to risk everything we have for it. We stood facing each other, and I could see that he was crying. In all our years of marriage, I had only seen Dexter cry twice. When his father died and when Celeste was born. What do we do now? He asked quietly. You have to return the money. Immediately. How? If I take it back to Stanfield, I'll have to explain where I got it. He'll realize I stole it. If you don't return it, He'll realize it anyway during the audit. Maybe he won't. Maybe he'll think it's a mistake in the paperwork or that someone else stole the money. Dexter! I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you want an innocent person to be suspected? No, of course not. It's just, I don't know what to do. I sat back down at the table, feeling completely devastated. All these years, I thought I knew my husband well. It turns out I didn't know him at all. You have a choice, I said slowly. Either you find a way to secretly return the money to the company, or I go to the police. Dexter looked at me in horror. You can't do that. I'm your husband. That's exactly why I have to do it. I can't live with a thief. I can't wake up every day knowing that my husband is a criminal. Marlena, please. He fell to his knees next to my chair. I beg you. Give me a chance to make it right. I'll find a way to return the money so that no one suspects anything. How? I don't know yet, but I will. Maybe I'll slip it into Stanfield's office at night, or I'll leave it somewhere on company property and call anonymously in the morning to tell them where to find it. I looked at him and thought about how just a day ago, my biggest problem was that my husband was coming home too early and not talking enough about work. You have a week, I finally said. If the money isn't back in a week, I'm going to the police. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, Marlene. And one more condition. You never, ever do anything like this again, even if we don't have money for food, even if we're facing bankruptcy. No stealing. I promise. I swear to you, he got up from his knees and tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I need time to process all this, I said. You're sleeping in the guest room tonight. We spent the rest of the evening in silence. Dexter went to his study and sat there until late at night, thinking or planning something. I went to bed early, but couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark and thought about how little we really know about people, even those closest to us. I also thought about how I would still have to find ointment for Barnaby tomorrow. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. Dexter had already left for work. I heard him quietly bustling about in the guest room, getting ready, and then the front door slammed. We hadn't spoken since our conversation in the kitchen yesterday. I sat alone at breakfast, mechanically drinking my coffee and thinking about what to do next. The week I had given Dexter seemed both too long and too short. On the one hand, every day with the stolen money in the house was torture for me. On the other hand, I understood that he needed time to figure out how to discreetly return such a large sum. At school, I could hardly concentrate on my lessons. The children noticed my distraction. In the third lesson, I forgot twice what topic I was explaining, and in the fourth, I accidentally called one of the students by the wrong name. By lunchtime, I realized I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I needed to talk to someone, and the only person I could trust was Odette. After class, I called her at the library. Odette, can we meet today? I tried to keep my voice calm. I need to talk to you. Of course. Her voice immediately took on a note of concern. Has something happened? I'll tell you when we meet. Maybe at your place? I don't want to talk about it in a cafe. Okay. Come at 6. I'll be closing the library then. Odette lived in a small apartment above Mrs. Porter's antique shop on Main Street. The apartment was cozy, though small. A living room combined with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom. The walls were lined with bookshelves, potted plants were everywhere, and the windows overlooked the town's main street. When I climbed the narrow staircase to her door, Odette was already waiting for me with a cup of tea and a worried look on her face. You look terrible, she said without preamble. Sit down and tell me what's wrong. I sat down in an old armchair by the window and took a deep breath. Remember when I told you that Dexter was acting strange? Of course I remember. Did you find out what was going on? I did. I clenched my hands into fists. Odette, he stole money from work. $300,000. Odette set her cup down so sharply that tea splashed onto the saucer. What? I found it yesterday in the storage room. $300,000 in cash in a gym bag. He admitted he stole it from Stanfield's company by forging contract documents. Odette was silent for a few seconds, digesting what she had heard. My God, Marlene! I can't believe it. Dexter! He always seemed like such an honest man. I thought so too. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. 26 years of marriage, and it turns out I don't know my husband at all. What does he say? Why did he need the money? I told Odette about Dexter's plans to start his own business, his complaints about Stanfield, how he justified his theft. What are you doing now? Odette asked when I finished. I gave him an ultimatum. He has a week to return the money. If he doesn't, I'm going to the police. That's right, Odette said firmly. You can't cover for a criminal, even if he's your husband. But I'm afraid, Odette. What if they put him in jail? What will happen to our family? Celeste will find out that her father is a thief. Everyone in town will be talking about it. And what will happen if you keep quiet? Odette asked. Will you be able to live with that? Waking up every day next to a man who is capable of such a thing? I knew she was right. But knowing it and accepting it are two different things. Maybe he'll find a way to return the money without anyone noticing, I said, without much conviction. What if he doesn't? What if they find the money during an audit and he's already spent it by then? Then he'll definitely go to prison, and for a long time. We talked until 8 in the evening. Odette supported my decision not to cover for Dexter, but I could see that she was worried too. We had been friends for a long time. She knew our family well and understood what a blow this was for all of us. I returned home tired and devastated. Dexter wasn't home yet. His car wasn't in the driveway. I made myself a light dinner and sat down to wait. Time dragged on slowly. At 9 o'clock, I called his cell phone, but it was turned off. Dexter came home at 10:30. I heard the car and went out into the hallway. He came in, avoiding my gaze, and I immediately realized he had been drinking. He smelled of alcohol, and his movements were unsteady. Where have you been? I asked. At the bar. He hung up his jacket and went into the kitchen. Thinking. Thinking about what? About how I'm going to live now. He opened the refrigerator and took out a beer. About the fact that my own wife is ready to turn me in to the police. Dexter, I don't want to turn you in. I want you to fix your mistake. My mistake? He turned sharply toward me. There was something new in his eyes, an anger I had never seen before. My mistake was thinking that my wife would support me in a difficult moment. Support you in stealing? Support you in trying to make our lives better. We stood in the kitchen yelling at each other. In 26 years of marriage, we had never had an argument like this. Fine, he said finally, taking a swig from the bottle. Fine, Marlene. You win. Tomorrow night, I'll return your damn money. It's not mine. It's stolen. What difference does it make? He waved his hand. The result is the same. We'll be left with nothing. We'll live in this house for the rest of our lives, counting every dollar, and you'll teach English to kids who can't even read. I love my job. Of course you do. Because you never wanted more. You're content with little, and I wanted to give us more by stealing? What other way is there for people like us? His voice became bitter. We weren't born rich. We have no connections, no startup capital. The only way to get out of this hole is to take what's lying around. I looked at him and realized that I was looking at a stranger. Not my husband with whom I had lived for more than half my life, but an embittered stranger. "I don't recognize you," I said quietly. "But I recognize you very well," he replied. "You've always been a coward, Marlene. You've always been afraid to take risks, always chosen the safe path. That's why we're stuck in this life." The next day, Dexter was at work all day, and in the evening, he came home gloomy and silent. We hardly spoke at dinner. Around 9, he went up to the storage room and brought down a bag of money. "Tonight, I'll take it to Stanfield's house," he said, placing the bag on the living room floor. "I'll throw it over the fence into the yard. Let him think that one of his employees decided to anonymously return the stolen money." "What if someone sees you?" "No one will see me. Stanfield lives outside the city. There are no neighbors nearby. And he doesn't have security either." At midnight, Dexter took the bag and left. I didn't sleep, waiting for him to return. Time dragged agonizingly slowly. I lay in bed and listened to every sound on the street, waiting to hear the sound of his car. He returned at 3 in the morning. I heard the car door slam, then the front door. Dexter climbed the stairs with heavy, uneven steps. He was very drunk. I could tell from the sound of his movements. I got up and went out onto the landing. "Dexter, are you okay?" He stood in the hallway, swaying, and looked at me with cloudy eyes. "Everything's fine," he said, drawing out his words. "Your money has been returned to its rightful owner." "Are you satisfied?" "Where have you been all this time?" "Celebrating." He walked past me to the stairs leading down. "Celebrating the end of our future." I followed him. In the kitchen, he took another bottle of beer out of the refrigerator, even though he could barely stand. "Dexter, stop drinking. You have to go to work tomorrow." "Work!" He laughed, but it was an unpleasant laugh. "To Stanfield, whom I have served faithfully for 20 years? To the man who pays me peanuts while he bathes in luxury? You did the right thing by returning the money." "Right?" He turned to me, his eyes burning with anger. "Do you know what I did? I threw our future over the fence to a man who already owns half the county. It wasn't our money." "Of course it wasn't." He slammed a bottle on the table, shattering it and scattering shards across the floor. "People like us have no right to money. We should be satisfied with scraps." "Dexter, calm down. You're drunk. I'm as sober as I've ever been." He grabbed a plate from the table and threw it against the wall. The plate shattered into pieces. "For 26 years, I've been an obedient husband, an honest worker, a model citizen. And what did I get in return?" He started smashing everything in sight. Cups, saucers, salt shakers. Everything flew to the floor. I tried to stop him, grabbing his arms, but he was stronger. "Dexter, stop! You'll wake the neighbors." "I don't care about the neighbors." He broke free from my grip and punched the window. The glass cracked, and blood appeared on his knuckles. At that moment, there was a knock at the front door. A loud, insistent knock. "Who could that be at this hour?" I whispered. Dexter didn't answer, continuing to stand by the broken window, breathing heavily. The knock repeated, even louder. "Marlena!" Barnaby's voice rang out. "Marlena, is everything okay?" I hurried to the door and opened it. Barnaby stood on the threshold in his bathrobe and slippers, looking concerned. "Sorry to bother you so late," he said, "but I heard a crash and screams." "Is everything okay?" Everything's fine, Barnaby." "It's just—" "Who's there?" Dexter appeared in the doorway, staggering. "Ah, it's our caring neighbor." "Dexter, you're drunk," Barnaby said gently. "Maybe you should go to bed." "Maybe you should mind your own business," Dexter snapped. "What are you doing here?" "I was worried about Marlene." I heard a noise. "Worried about Marlene?" Dexter's eyes narrowed. Oh, or maybe you've been watching her for a long time. Maybe you're waiting for the right moment. Dexter, I gasped. What are you talking about? I'm talking about our lovely neighbor taking too much interest in our business. Barnaby blushed. Dexter, you're out of control. I just wanted to help. Help? Dexter took a step forward. Get out of here before I do something I'll regret. Dexter, calm down. Barnaby tried to intervene, but Dexter had already swung his fist and punched the elderly man in the face. Barnaby staggered, lost his balance, and fell onto the porch steps. Dexter, I shouted. What are you doing? But he wasn't listening. Grabbing Barnaby by the collar of his robe, he lifted him up and literally pushed him out the gate. And don't meddle in our affairs anymore, he shouted after his neighbor. Barnaby, clutching his bruised cheek, hurried home. Dexter returned to the house, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the hallway, trembling with fear. You're crazy, I whispered. Barnaby is an elderly man. How could you hit him? He was meddling. He was worried about us. He's a good man, and you— Shut up, Dexter barked. Shut up with your lectures. He swung his arm and hit me in the face. The blow was hard, and I tasted blood in my mouth. I stood with my hand pressed against my cheek, looking at the man who had been my husband for 26 years. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with rage. This is all because of you, he said, pointing his finger at me. Because of your principles. Because of your fear of taking risks. We could have lived differently, but you ruined everything. He staggered, took another step toward me, but lost his balance and fell heavily right there in the hallway. Lying on the floor, he muttered something under his breath, but I couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, he fell asleep right there on the floor, not even making it to the guest room. I stood over him, holding my bruised cheek, and realized that my family was completely destroyed. The man I loved and trusted had turned into a drunken bully, capable of hitting his wife and elderly neighbor. The $300,000 was returned, but the price of that return was too high. I hardly slept that night. I lay in bed and listened to Dexter snoring on the floor in the hallway. My cheek hurt from the blow, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional pain. In one night, everything I had believed in for 26 years had collapsed. My marriage, my family, my idea of who my husband was. Around 6 in the morning, I got up, took a shower, and carefully went downstairs. Dexter was still lying on the floor in the hallway, curled up in a ball. He smelled of alcohol and sweat. I walked into the kitchen, where I was met with chaos. Broken dishes, shards of glass, puddles of beer on the floor. The cracked window gaped with a web of cracks. I started cleaning up. I picked up the shards, washed the floor, wiped the tables. The physical work helped me not to think about what had happened. When the kitchen looked like a kitchen again, I made myself a strong coffee and sat down at the table, thinking about what to do next. Around 7 in the morning, Dexter started to stir. He groaned, rolled onto his back, then slowly opened his eyes. He lay there for a few seconds, clearly trying to figure out where he was and what had happened. Then his memory must have returned, because he sighed heavily and sat up with difficulty. "Marlena?" he called in a hoarse voice. I didn't answer. A minute later, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching his head. He looked terrible. Wrinkled clothes, tousled hair, swollen face, red eyes. "My head is splitting," he muttered, sitting down at the table opposite me. "No wonder," I said coldly. "You drank a whole bottle of whiskey at the bar yesterday, and then more beer at home." He rubbed his face with his hands. "I don't remember everything." What happened? Why was I sleeping on the floor? "You broke half the dishes in the kitchen, punched a window, beat up our neighbor Barnaby, and hit me in the face," I said calmly. And then you fell down and fell asleep in the hallway. Dexter looked up at me. There was horror in his eyes. I. I hit you? Yes. I turned my left cheek toward him, where the bruise was still visible. And Barnaby, too. An elderly man who was just worried about us. My God, he whispered. Marlena, I don't remember. I was very drunk. That's no excuse. No, of course not. He stood up and tried to approach me. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I'll never raise my hand to you again. Sit down, I said sharply. Don't come near me. He stopped as if he had run into a wall. Dexter, I continued, looking him straight in the eye. I want you to pack your things and leave this house. What? You heard me. I'm filing for divorce. He sank into a chair as if his legs had given way. Marlena, no. Please. I know I behaved terribly last night, but I can fix this. I'll stop drinking, see a therapist. It's too late. I shook my head. I can't live with a man who steals money and then beats his wife and neighbors. But I gave the money back. I did what you asked. Yes, you did. But that doesn't change the fact that you stole it. And it doesn't change what happened last night. Dexter clutched his head. Marlena, we've been married for 26 years. We have a daughter together, a house together, a life together. You can't throw all that away because of one mistake. One mistake? I stood up, feeling anger rising inside me. You call stealing $300,000 one mistake? And hitting me is also a mistake? I was drunk. I couldn't control myself. That's exactly why I can't live with you. Because now I know what you're capable of when you can't control yourself. He was silent for a few minutes, digesting my words. What will you tell Celeste? He finally asked. What will you tell the neighbors, the people in town? I'll tell them the truth. That my husband turned out to be not the person I thought he was. You'll ruin my reputation. In a small town like ours, I won't be able to find another job. You ruined your own reputation when you decided to become a thief. Dexter stood up and began pacing around the kitchen. I could see him trying to find arguments that would make me change my mind. Fine, he said finally. Fine, Marlene. If that's what you've decided, I won't beg you. But know this, you're making a huge mistake. We could fix everything, start over. But your pride is more important than our family. My pride? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dexter, you stole money and hit me. And I'm to blame for not wanting to put up with that? You're to blame for not giving me a chance to make things right. You've had 26 years to show me what kind of person you are. It turns out you're a thief and a bully. Dexter stopped and looked at me with such hatred that I instinctively stepped back. Fine, he said slowly. Very fine. Live alone in your perfect world, where everyone is honest and noble. Let's see how long you last without a husband. Longer than with a husband like you. He left the kitchen, and a few minutes later, I heard him walking around the house, packing his things. The sounds were loud, deliberately harsh. He slammed cabinet doors and threw items into a bag. It was his last display of aggression, and I sat in the kitchen, waiting for it to end. Half an hour later, he came downstairs with 2 bags and a box. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. I'll take the rest of my things later, he said, when you're not home. Okay. And one more thing. His voice became angry. Don't think that the divorce will be the end of it. This house is ours, and I'm entitled to half of it. I'm also entitled to alimony if I earn less than you. Let the court decide. It will definitely decide. He came closer. And know this, Marlene. You'll regret this decision. You'll crawl back to me on your knees. Never. He smirked and left. A minute later, I heard the sound of a car. He had left, slamming the door so hard that the windows in the house rattled. I was left alone in the house, which suddenly seemed huge and empty. I sat down at the kitchen table and cried. I cried for a long time, bitterly, from pain, disappointment, and fear of the unknown future. When the tears stopped, I called Celeste at work. Mom? Her voice immediately sounded worried. Did something happen? Are you crying? Can you come over tonight? I need to talk to you. Of course. Where's Dad? I'll tell you tonight. Celeste came right after work, around 7 in the evening. I met her in the kitchen, where I had already cleaned up all traces of yesterday's destruction, except for the cracked window. Mom, what's going on? She asked, kissing me on the cheek. And what happened to your face? You have a bruise. Sit down, dear. I need to tell you something. The next half hour was one of the most difficult of my life. I told my daughter everything about the stolen money, the ultimatum last night, the fight with Barnaby, and the blow I received from her father. Celeste listened silently, and I could see her face becoming more and more shocked with every word I said. That can't be, she said when I finished. Dad couldn't have done that. Stealing money isn't like him. He confessed himself, and I saw the money with my own eyes. And hitting you. Celeste shook her head. Mom, in my entire life, I've never seen Dad raise a hand to you. Neither have I. Until yesterday. Celeste stood up and came over to me, gently touching my cheek. Does it hurt? Not so much anymore. The emotional pain is much stronger. My daughter hugged me, and I cried again. This time not out of despair, but out of relief. I have someone who supports and understands me. What will happen now? Celeste asked. I'll live alone. I'll file for divorce. I'll try to forget these 26 years and start over. At 50? What choice do I have? I can't live with someone I don't trust. Celeste nodded. You're right, Mom. If he's capable of that, then you really didn't know him. Thank you for understanding, dear. Where is he now? I don't know. Probably rented a room somewhere, or staying with one of his colleagues. We talked late into the night. Celeste offered to move in with me for a while, but I refused. She's young, she has her own life, her own plans. It was enough that she supported me emotionally. The following weeks were difficult. I was learning to live alone after 26 years of marriage. Every morning, I woke up in an empty house, ate breakfast alone, and came home from work to silence. At first, it was depressing, but gradually, I began to find the advantages of being alone. No one turned the TV up full blast. No one left things lying around. No one came home drunk and aggressive. Odette supported me as best she could. We met every 2 or 3 days and talked about everything except Dexter. She helped me find a good divorce lawyer, a woman named Victoria Marshall, who worked in a neighboring town. Barnaby avoided me for the first few days after the fight, probably embarrassed by what had happened. But when I approached him myself to apologize for my husband's behavior, he was very understanding. Don't apologize, Marlene, he said. I understand that Dexter wasn't himself. Alcohol does terrible things to people. That's no excuse for what he did. Of course it's no excuse, but I don't hold a grudge. The main thing is that you're all right. Rumors began to spread around town, of course. In a small place like Harville, the divorce of a local school teacher couldn't go unnoticed. People whispered, made assumptions, and some even approached me with questions. I responded briefly and curtly. My husband and I had decided to separate, and it was our private business. The worst part was that Dexter was spreading his version of events. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard his words that I had kicked him out of the house for no reason, that I had become cold and unkind, that I might have another man. These rumors hurt, but I tried not to pay attention to them. Weeks passed. October turned into November, then December. I gradually got used to my new life. Work was a distraction, and the house needed attention. I had to call a repairman to replace a broken window, fix a leaky faucet in the bathroom, and get the house ready for winter. All these little chores that Dexter used to take care of were now mine. In mid-December, Celeste and Odette started talking about my upcoming birthday. I was turning 50 on January 23rd, and they thought it was something to celebrate. "Mom," Celeste said, as we were having dinner at my house one December evening, "your 50th birthday is an important milestone. We need to throw you a real party. I don't think I have anything to celebrate," I replied. Being alone at 50 isn't exactly a cause for celebration. "On the contrary," interjected Odette, who had come to visit us. "You're starting a new life. You've freed yourself from a man who didn't appreciate you. That's definitely worth celebrating." "Yes, Mom," Celeste agreed. "You're a strong woman. You've overcome trials that would have broken many people. That needs to be celebrated." They insisted for several weeks. They suggested throwing a party at home, but I refused. I didn't want people gathering in my house to discuss my divorce. Then Celeste suggested celebrating the anniversary at a restaurant. "At the Golden Horseshoe?" I asked, referring to the only decent restaurant in Harville. "That's the place. We'll invite your colleagues from school, a few neighbors, my friends. We'll have a real celebration." "I don't know, dear. What if your father comes?" "He won't," Celeste said firmly. "I haven't spoken to him since the day I found out the truth." "And I'm not going to invite him." This was news to me. I knew Celeste was having a hard time with her parents' divorce, but I didn't know she had completely cut off contact with her father. "Celeste, he's still your father." "A father who stole money and hit my mother?" She shook her head. "No, Mom, I don't have a father like that." In the end, they persuaded me. In mid-January, we booked a table for 20 at the Golden Horseshoe and sent out invitations. I invited several colleagues from school. Odette invited her friends from the library, and Celeste invited her co-workers from the hospital. Barnaby also received an invitation. Over the past few months, we had become even closer, and he had become almost like a father to me. As my birthday approached, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I wanted to celebrate the beginning of a new life, as Celeste and Odette said. On the other hand, 50 is a significant milestone, and it was sad to celebrate it without my husband, no matter how bad he turned out to be. But the girls were right about one thing. I had indeed become stronger over the past few months. I had learned to cope with loneliness, to make decisions on my own, to not depend on a man's opinion and support. Maybe it really was worth celebrating. On January 23rd, at 6 in the evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, putting on a dark blue dress that I had bought especially for the occasion. 50 years is a milestone, and I wanted to look my best. During the months since my divorce, I had lost some weight due to stress, and the dress fit me better than I had expected. Celeste picked me up at 6:30. She looked beautiful in a burgundy dress, her hair styled elegantly. "Mom, you look gorgeous," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Are you ready to start a new chapter in your life?" "I hope so," I replied, though I still felt nervous inside. The Golden Horseshoe was the best restaurant in Harville, although by metropolitan standards, it was a modest establishment. The rustic interior, wooden tables, fireplace in the corner, and subdued lighting created a cozy atmosphere. The restaurant's owner, Robert McLean, personally greeted us at the entrance. "Mrs. Wakefield, congratulations on your anniversary," he said with a smile. "We have prepared the best table for you." The guests had already begun to gather. Odette was one of the first to arrive, elegant in a black suit, with a bouquet of white roses for me. She was followed by my colleagues from school, Jennifer Cole, math teacher, Michael Harrison, history teacher, and Susan Deavy, school principal. Celeste's friends from the hospital arrived: Carol, Linda, and the young doctor, Ethan Blake, with whom I suspected my daughter had a romantic relationship. Barnaby arrived around 7, wearing his best suit and carrying a cane. Winter was hard on him, and his back still hurt. He gave me a beautiful brooch, which he said had belonged to his late wife, Dorothy. She would have wanted this brooch to go to a worthy woman, he said, fastening the brooch on my dress. By 7:30, almost all the guests had arrived. 20 people at a large table. I hadn't seen that in a very long time. The atmosphere was warm and friendly. People told stories from their school days, shared news, and laughed at the jokes of Michael Harrison, who was famous for his sense of humor. Susan Devi stood up with a glass of wine in her hand. "Friends, I would like to propose a toast to our dear Marlene," she began, "to a woman who has devoted 22 years of her life to the children of our city, teaching them not only literacy, but also humanity. To a woman who has shown us all what it means to be strong and dignified in all circumstances." Everyone raised their glasses. I felt tears of gratitude welling up in my eyes. "Thank you," I said, standing up. "Thank you all for being here, for your support during these difficult months. You have become a real family to me." We drank, and the conversation continued. Waiters served appetizers, wine flowed freely, and soft jazz played in the background. I felt happy for the first time in many months. Around 9 o'clock, Robert McLean brought out a cake, a beautiful 3-tiered cake with 50 candles. Everyone began singing "Happy Birthday," and I made a wish as I blew out the candles. I wished for a peaceful and happy life without turmoil and drama. At that very moment, the restaurant door opened and Dexter walked in. The conversation stopped. Everyone turned toward the door. Dexter looked terrible, unshaven, in a wrinkled jacket, with red eyes. It was clear that he was very drunk. He was staggering, holding on to the doorframe. "Well, well," he said loudly, looking around the room. "What a lovely party, and I wasn't invited." Celeste stood up. "Dad, leave! You weren't invited." "What do you mean I wasn't invited?" Dexter smirked. "It's my wife's birthday. Don't I have the right to wish her a happy birthday?" "Ex-wife," Celeste corrected him. "Not yet. The divorce isn't official yet." He swayed over to our table. The guests looked at him with surprise and awkwardness. Robert McLean headed toward him, clearly intending to escort the uninvited guest out, but Dexter beat him to it. "Can I have the microphone?" he asked the musician who was playing background music. "I want to make a toast." "Dexter, don't," I said quietly. "Please leave." "Don't?" He came closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. "I think I will. I've wanted to tell all these people the truth about you for a long time." The musician, confused, handed him the microphone. Dexter took it and stood in the center of the room. "Dear friends of Marlene," he began, his voice sounding too loud in the speakers, "you are gathered here to celebrate the 50th birthday of a remarkable woman. Allow me to raise a toast." He raised a glass he had taken from a neighboring table. "To Marlene Wakefield," he continued, swaying on his feet, "to a woman who can destroy families with a single word. To a woman who chose her pride over her husband's well-being." A dead silence fell over the room. People looked at each other, not knowing what to do. "Dexter, that's enough," Barnaby said, starting to get up from his seat. "No, it's not enough," Dexter barked. "These people need to know what she's really like. Cold, calculating, ruthless." He took a sip from his glass and continued. "You know what I wish for her on this festive day?" His voice grew even louder, even angrier. "I wish she would die like a dog. It's a shame she's still with us. It's a shame she's still breathing and poisoning the air with her presence." Several women gasped. Ethan Blake stood up and headed toward Dexter, but Dexter continued. Let her rot in solitude, just as her callous soul has rotted. May no one ever love her, because she is incapable of loving herself. He fell silent, breathing heavily and looking at me with hatred. There was a deafening silence in the room. I slowly got up from my seat. My heart was beating so hard that I was afraid everyone would hear it. I walked over to Dexter and held out my hand. Give me the microphone, I said quietly. What? He blinked, not understanding. Give me the microphone, Dexter. Now it's my turn to speak. He probably thought I was going to apologize to the guests on his behalf, and handed me the microphone. I took it, took a few steps back, and looked at the people gathered there. They were my friends, my colleagues, people who respected me. They deserved the truth. Friends, I began, trying to keep my voice calm. I want to tell you something. 4 months ago, I found $300,000 in cash in my house. Stolen money. A muffled murmur rippled through the room. Dexter turned sharply toward me. Marlena, what are you doing? He hissed. Telling the truth, I replied, keeping my eyes on the guests. My husband stole this money from his employer by forging documents. He was going to spend it on his own business without telling me a word. Several people at the table exchanged glances. I saw Tom Anderson and Jerry Cooper sitting among the guests. They worked for the same company as Dexter. When I demanded that he return what he had stolen, he agreed, I continued. But after the money was returned, he came home drunk and trashed the kitchen. And when our neighbor Barnaby tried to find out what was going on, my husband beat him up. Barnaby nodded, confirming my words. And then he hit me in the face, I said. For the first time in 26 years of marriage, my husband raised his hand to me. Shut up! Dexter shouted, trying to grab the microphone from me. Shut up! You're twisting everything! Ethan Blake and Michael Harrison stood up and took him aside. That's why I filed for divorce, I continued. Not because of pride, as my ex-husband said. It's because I can't live with a thief and a man who hits women. I handed the microphone to the musician and sat down in my seat. My hands were shaking, but inside I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, the truth had been told. Tom Anderson got up and walked over to Dexter. Dexter, is this true? He asked. Did you steal money from the company? That's none of your business, Dexter muttered. It's very much my business, Tom said. I work for the same company. If there's theft going on, Mr. Stanfield needs to know about it. I'll talk to my boss tomorrow, Jerry Cooper added. He'll investigate, and if it's true, he'll call the police. No, Dexter backed away. I returned the money. I didn't take anything. You just heard what your wife said, Tom remarked, and she doesn't seem like a liar. Robert McLean approached Dexter. Sir, I ask you to leave my restaurant, he said firmly. You are disturbing our guests. I'll leave myself, said Dexter. I have no business here. But when he headed for the exit, Ethan Blake and Michael Harrison took him by the arms. We'll walk you out, said Ethan, so you don't change your mind. They led him out of the restaurant, and Tom Anderson followed. At the door, I heard Tom say, Dexter, if you think you're going to get away with this, you're wrong. Mr. Stanfield doesn't like thieves. When the door closed behind them, silence fell over the room. Then Odette stood up and began to clap. Celeste joined her, then Barnaby, then everyone else. Marlena, said Susan Deevy, I admire your courage. You did the right thing. I'm sorry you had to see all that, I said. It's not the best way to celebrate a birthday. On the contrary, Jennifer Cole objected, You showed us what it means to be a strong woman. Not everyone would dare to tell the truth in such a situation. You don't judge me for being married to a thief? Why should we judge you? Asked Barnaby. You didn't know he was like that. And when you found out, you did the right thing. The rest of the evening passed in a more relaxed atmosphere. People came up to me, expressed their support, and shared their stories. It turned out that many had similar problems in their families, but not everyone found the strength to solve them. Around 11 o'clock, the guests began to leave. Celeste and Ethan drove me home. Mom, my daughter said when we pulled up to the house, I'm proud of you. You were a real hero today. Luck, I don't know if I was a hero, I replied. I was just tired of keeping quiet. You did the right thing, Mrs. Wakefield, Ethan added. People like your ex-husband need to be held accountable for their actions. At home, I couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I lay in bed and thought about what had happened. For the first time in 4 months, I didn't feel a heavy weight on my chest. The truth had been told, the secret revealed, and now I didn't have to pretend and hide. Tomorrow, a new life would begin. A life without lies, without fear, without the need to keep silent about what was tormenting me. And that was the best gift I could give myself for my 50th birthday. I summed up this story with 3 things. First, silence does not solve problems. It is important to talk about pain. Second, love without respect turns into humiliation. Third, sometimes leaving is not a weakness, but a strength. What do you think? Is it worth fighting to the end, or is it better to save yourself? Write your opinion in the comments and tell us where you are listening to us from.